That'd be amazing.
Hi guys, so we're Rapture Studios. I'm Emma Snow.
I'm Christian Langston.
I'm Daniel Hall.
I'm Mike Peterson.
I'm Anthony Watson.
So first of all, we have a video for you. So, what is Departed? Departed is a sci-fi MMO RPG with free-to-play elements and a quest-driven gameplay, and Departed is set on Pluto. Our story begins with the Roswell incident in 1947 when the government supposedly covered up a crash landing. On this ship, they found a mineral called genericium. Genericium was then found to have properties that had never been seen on Earth, and that they originated from near Pluto, and that Pluto itself had deposits of genericium. The scientists and engineers then reverse engineered the ship, and because they were pretty unhappy with the way that other people on Earth were treating them and running things, they decided to steal the ship. They moved to Pluto and placed a dome on Pluto. This had a self-sustained city inside. They then set up terraformers around, and this spread their settlements further, and they expanded every day. Meanwhile, Earth is pretty annoyed because they've stolen their ship and they want vengeance. But it takes 50 years to get the same technology as the ship did have, so this then brings us to the present, when they finally arrive. They hit Pluto with mining drills, drop pods, and they just fight with the Plutonians and Earthlings to regain power, basically, and one side's fighting for their new home and the other one obviously for vengeance. Our story doesn't follow a set linear path. It has an overarching story. This is because it's an MMO. Our quests are optional, but you do need to do them for progression. The primary story revolves around the conflict of the game, around the Plutonians and Earthlings. It's told differently depending on which faction you're in, so Earthlings or Plutonians, and also through environmental cues and NPCs talking. We want this to end in a stalemate, this conflict to end in a stalemate, and this will be patched later in a year after release, and this will then lead to our first expansion. We also have a Gantt chart to show all of the timing of everything.
For our audience research, we conducted a questionnaire on Quick Survey, and this is the results we got. As you can see on the left, males outnumbered the females almost 6-1, which means that there is a bigger male community in games. On the right, you see the age group. It starts to rise from 16 to 20, and from 21 up, it increases significantly. As you can see here, sci-fi and on the right, RPG were the two most popular genres. So we decided to base our game upon these results. We based our game on PC for many reasons, but one of the most was because of controls. If you have an MMO on a PC, there is no limit on how many buttons you can have or actions you can do. To make sure our game achieves a teen rating, from the figures that we saw earlier, the interest started to raise from 16 to 20. We'll be making sure that there is no intense graphic violence and that there is no strong language involved. Two examples of this is a MMO on console and an MMO on PC. With Destiny, it was very hyped, only to be released, and disappointing the customers and players. Whereas World of Warcraft has a much bigger player base and has been successful for over 10 years and still increasing. These are the controls. We based our controls around many MMOs. As players do not like too much change, we just sort of adapted our controls around this. Players will be able to change the bindings throughout to their liking.
Awesome. So I get to talk to you about Game World. Before I start, I want to say that we did put a lot of time and effort in sort of the history of our Pluto, but due to time constraints, we had to cut out a lot of it. You can find the cut slides on the board over there, and after the presentation, I'll be happy to talk through them to anyone who's interested in finding out more sort of about the history of our planet. So this is what Pluto looks like in our game. It's one large continent with a few smaller islands dotted around it. When the Plutonians first arrived, as Emma said, the planet was uninhabitable. It was an icy wasteland. So they used an advanced kind of machinery called a terraformer. The terraformer artificially changes the environment of the area around it. So using these machines, they turned the icy wastes of Pluto into a green grassy paradise for the fledgling faction to inhabit. They did this by dividing the continent up into smaller zones, each one with a terraformer, one of the triangles, at the centre of it. The problem is, having an entire game world that's just green grassy paradise, it'd be incredibly boring. We'd never attract a player base, and even if we did, we wouldn't be able to hold one down. We needed diversity, because diversity would build interest, and interest means more players. In the war between the Earthlings and the Plutonians, the terraformers have started to become damaged. These damaged terraformers have affected the environments around them in negative ways, from arid deserts and volcanic flats to infested jungles and human swamplands. Each zone in our game will have a unique look and feel to it. It will make exploration interesting for players and fun to take part in. Another problem that we thought of was, once we get players playing, how we keep them there. We looked at other games on the current market, including World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2. Both games have small patches that come out every few months. World of Warcraft has 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, where they introduce new raids and end-game content for players to take part in. And Guild Wars has what they call their living world updates, where the entire world will change with each, well, not the entire world. Zones will change with an update. An example being, if a tower is felled, the zone around that tower then has to put up with the pollution that comes from the rubble of the tower. We have one of these events planned. We will have several over the first year of our release, which will lead up to our first expansion. This first small living world update, this first patch will... Sorry. Oh, bum. No, it's fine. I've clicked the wrong button. Our first update will take place in this circular zone here, which is called the drill. It's the central hub of the the Earthling mining operation upon Pluto. The idea of this patch is that this zone will collapse inwards and it will be renamed the Breach. And this will also give high-level players a new endgame zone to explore, which is called the Depths, a zone that's completely based underground. And I'll be handing you off to Mike to tell you about interesting stuff.
So, gameplay. It's the flesh and bones of any game, really. It's why you keep coming back to play games, and it's why games exist. So what we tried to do when we designed Departed was to combine the features from the more ambitious new games that have been coming out and the older games that millions of people are used to. And the first way we did this was when we designed our classes. There are 6 distinct classes in Departed. The first one that you see here is a Neuromancer, who is a damage over time DPS class. He uses swarms of nanites to assault enemies and can cast stun and fear debuffs for crowd control. They're hugely useful in any team fight really, and if you have one of them on your party, or if you're playing as one, you're probably going to be seen as a god. We have the Colossus, who's your standard tank. He can take a lot of damage and can also be a horrible nuisance to enemies. He can stun, he can charge at enemies and close distances really quickly. And he's also someone you want to have on your party. The Marksman, quite a squishy class, but can be annoying nonetheless. He can deal massive burst damage from afar, but if anyone gets up close to him, he's gone. There's no hiding that. The Cleric, our first sort of hybrid class. It's a mix of tanking and healing. The Cleric mostly relies on casting buffs for allies and for themselves. He can increase damage, increase health temporarily, reduce incoming damage and whatnot. My bad. We also have two more classes. The Saboteur, which is a stealth-based class. It can sneak up behind enemies, it can scout out ahead in raids, which we'll cover in a minute. Can also deal a load of damage like the Marksman, but also tends to collapse under pressure from enemies. And we have the Engineer, which is sort of a unique class when you consider it, because he can fill all three roles, DPS, tanking, and healing. He does this by constructing robots or mini structures which provide buffs to allies in an area. The robots themselves can stun, heal, or attack in swarms. So, PvE, that's what keeps most people going in MMOs. That's what people play mostly. What you see here is a threat level map of Pluto, essentially. The white zone on the left is the starting zone. That's where everything kicks off. That's when the Plutonians and the Earthlings first clash. The green zones are the starting zones for both of the areas once they've actually customized their character and selected a class. And from then, the yellow zones, the orange and red zones are the logical progression of how the players would go for the game. Although that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, especially if you choose to just do dungeons for the entirety of a level, and you can end up going from a green zone to a red zone in maybe 20-30 hours. And the very dark red zones are either dungeons or endgame zones, which tend to contain a lot of loot and much stronger enemies. PvP. This is something that scares a lot of people off. A lot of people are afraid of losing their items, losing currency, or just afraid of getting killed by someone they don't know. So what we've tried to do is have two forms of PvP in the game. The first one is friendly PvP. In just about any settlement in the game, you can find training grounds where you can invite other players to duel you, and doing this has no negative effects. If you lose, nothing happens. But if you win, you might even get some currency from a local trainer or something along those lines. But we also have proper PvP. This is where, that's the wrong slide. This is where you're at risk. You can lose items, you can lose money, you can potentially lose experience depending on how hard you get kicked. This will usually take place on PvP servers, but you can also flag yourself for PvP, which means anyone who wants to can attack you, unless they're from your faction, of course. We've taken something else into account. Some people don't like combat, which makes sense, but most games don't account for it. So we have a system called professions, which let you be a part of the game world without actually putting yourself out in danger. What this means is that you can craft armor for other people, you can craft equipment, customization items, just about anything, and this will leave you on this will let you level separate skills, which can actually have a huge impact on the in-game economy, since most items will be crafted by players, and buying them or being given them will be the only way to get them. There's also one thing I haven't mentioned yet, the raids. That's the group content of the game. You can do them in 5, 10 or 20 man groups. they tend to be difficult, horribly so, which is why you need people you can coordinate with and be able to work as a team. But they can also be hugely beneficial. You get the best loot from them, lots of gold, and possibly achievements.
Right, so obviously, being an MMO, you've got to have different enemies, otherwise it's just going to constantly be player versus player. Enemies in our game can come from different forms, shapes and sizes, so I've got a reference image here from Ratchet and Clank if anyone's played it. Basically, the enemies on the far right would be a reference to how weak an enemy can be, so the weaker they are, the smaller they are, but the more stronger, the more the higher level, the more tanked up they'll be and the more difficult they are to defeat, basically. When an enemy is defeated, corresponding to their level, obviously, the player will gain more experience and better loot from them. When a player sees an enemy, they have to obviously click on them to see, their health bar, their level, and their energy bar to, correspond to see whether or not they'll want to attack them, or even want to fight them. There are two different types of enemies, though. They're the hostile and the neutral. And the way you can tell this is they'll have an energy ring around them, and corresponding to the colour, it will tell whether or not they're neutral or hostile. If they're hostile, upon the player seeing the enemy will instantly attack them whether or not they want to engage in battle with them. But if they're neutral, they can just pass them without having to, attack them at any point. Obviously, it'll be a red energy ring for hostile, yellow for neutral. This is a certain enemy that actually exists on Blitz, known as the Rockbiter. Basically, as an example, as a low level Rockbiter, it'll be as small as basically the scale there as the foot, basically. It'll be small enough, but as it gains level and higher and everything, it will become a lot stronger and a lot bigger foe to go up against. The main way he was adapted and created was by eating genericium that was found on Pluto and everything. And the stronger, he is basically, the more genericium he eats, the more difficult foe he is for the player. Basically, bosses in the game are a lot like the enemies. Obviously, they come in different shapes, forms, and levels. But all enemies are hostile, so there's no chance if you see one, that's an instant, you have to engage with them whether or not you want to. Again, bosses will have the levels, so the higher the level, the more experience, the better loot you'll get from them. Some bosses in the game can have similar attacks to what the player can have. So for example, like the Colossus class, some bosses may have the power to use charge attacks or things like that, so the player will have to think differently about how to take it out without damaging themselves. Different types of HCI that we've had to incorporate into the game include music, colour psychology, and semiotics. The way music has been incorporated into it is, if a player is about to engage in a boss battle, the music in the overhead will change corresponding to where they are or the boss battle. And once the boss has been defeated, the music will return back to wherever they are in the zone. The colour psychology that we use will be like the energy rings around the enemy, so you'll know whether or not they're hostile or whatnot. Semiotics. When you click on an enemy or whatever, you'll be able to see the health bar, and that helps the player to realise how much damage they can inflict onto the enemy, or how much damage they'll take after an attack or whatever. This is an example of the HUD design that we'll have. So in the top left we have the player's health bar and energy bar underneath it. Next to it we've got if they're fighting with another person in their party or whatever, they've got two players at once, that'll come up with their stats, their level, and their health and energy, so the player will be aware of how strong the people they're playing with in the party is. Underneath that will be a current quest bar, so that'll illustrate what they're currently doing, where they have to go, and what they have to do for their quest. On the far right, there's a small mini-map, so that'll illustrate what zone they're in, if there are enemies around them, or where the other people in their party are. Below that is a chat bar, so basically, if you're with other people in your party, or anyone else is around your vicinity, you can talk to them and say whether or not do you want to come with them, or do you want to do the same quest or whatever. And the bottom left is a quick select tab, so basically if you've got certain attacks that your class can do, you can basically put it into the quick select, and then that will make it a bit easier for you to select certain attacks when you do it. See?
Right, so free to play. This is why you're here. You want to know where your money's going and how you get it back. So when we talked about monetization in Departed, we've tried to follow a philosophy of giving customers value for money. If you try to scam your customers, they'll leave you and move on to something else in what's already a kind of oversaturated market. So we looked at World of Warcraft.